It gives me such great pleasure to introduce to you Gene Baur. Let me read you a little bit about who he is, and then I'll say a couple of words as to why he's here. So, Gene has been hailed as the conscience of the food movement by Time magazine. Since the mid-1980s, he has traveled extensively campaigning to raise awareness about the abuses of industrialized factory farming and our system of cheap food production. A pioneer in the field of undercover investigations and farm animal rescue, Gene has visited hundreds of farms, stockyards, and slaughterhouses, documenting the deplorable conditions. His pictures and videos exposing factory farming cruelties have aired nationally and internationally, educating millions about the plight of modern farm animals, and his rescue work inspired an international farm sanctuary movement. Gene has also testified in courts and before local, state, and federal legislative bodies, advocating for better conditions for farm animals. His most important achievements include winning the first ever cruelty conviction at a U.S. stockyard and introducing the first U.S. laws to prohibit cruel farming confinement methods in Florida, Arizona, and California. His efforts have been covered by top news organizations including the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Chicago Tribune, and the Wall Street Journal. Gene has published 2 bestsellers, Farm Sanctuary, Changing Hearts and Minds About Animals and Food, and Living the Farm Sanctuary Life, which he co-authored with Forks Over Knives author Gene Stone. So, how many of us here eat plants? Or would say you're plant eaters? Okay. How many of us here eat plants primarily for health reasons? Okay. Most of us. Okay. So,
I started that way.
That's a nice statement. I started that way too. So, Gene and I and Suzanne sat up until midnight discussing why he was here. Because from the surface, after reading this, you would think, well, I'm here to find out about my health, or I'm embedded in doing this, which is not easy to do, right? Look at Sharon, primarily for my health. Of what interest would I have in listening to a person who eats plants because of animal rights issues? It's not necessarily apparent, but I just want to tell you a little anecdote as to why it became apparent to me. So, I've been thinking about it since we had our discussion last night. There are 3 reasons why people eat plant-based diets. Did you know that? Number 1, because of concern for their own health. Number 2, because of concerns for animal rights. Number 3, because of concern for the environment. An Ethos farm, I figured out last night, for the first time, is where all of these 3 things intersect. And Ethos farm is unusual in that respect in the plant-based world, because the reason why what drives our philosophy here is concern for all 3 of these reasons and purposes. I bought this farm in 2011 because of the health concerns and because of the environmental concerns. But it wasn't completely clear to me regarding the animal concerns. You know, I can view myself as a compassionate person. I'm a physician, and I have compassion. I knew I had compassion for wildlife and the environment and for human beings and people who are suffering and all things that were suffering. But when I when we got this farm, I wasn't sufficiently mindful about what else I needed to do until one day in that beautiful field, on a beautiful sunny fall day, we had an intern here who, even though everyone was eating plants, this intern decided for Thanksgiving to raise 15 heritage turkey pullets in a little enclosure. It looked like a little house in the middle of the field. And, you know, I didn't have anything to do with that. You know, I was like an innocent bystander. And then, as 2 days before Thanksgiving, he came up to me and said, "Dr. Weiss, would you like one of these turkeys for your Thanksgiving?" Now, the thing you may not know about Dr. Weiss is, Dr. Weiss has been eating turkey on Thanksgiving Day since before I could remember as a small child. And I loved doing that. And my specific way of eating the turkey, hate dark meat, always did, but I liked the white meat turkey, and I would dip it in mayonnaise since I was a boy. And that's the way, it had a, you know, it was my Proust Madeleine to me. It was, you know, institutionalized in my emotions. It was what Thanksgiving was to me. And so I said, not being mindful, I said, yes, I would like that. And more than that, I decided to rope my children into this situation because being an environmentalist, I figured, well, if they're going to eat turkey, you know, on this one day, they should know where their food comes from. And they should experience how this food is gotten and at what cost. But I was not mindful enough to know what cost it would be to me. So, or to the turkey. So our intern took us out into the enclosure, and all of the 14 other birds had been taken out and were gone to the other, you know, eaters. And there was this one bird left. And we walked into this, it was a beautiful sunny day in the fall. The mountains were still turning colors, and it was so beautiful and sunny, and such, you see, it's a peaceful place, right? And we walked into this pen, and as soon as we did that, terror was in this animal's eyes. And he became frantic because, you know, as much as we don't give birds credit for intelligence, this animal knew, or sensed, I thought, what was coming. Because he had seen all his friends who he'd been raised with plucked out. And he became frantic. And the intern had a very difficult time cornering him. Spent a couple of minutes trying to apprehend him because he was just trying to escape for his life. And when he finally did, he grabbed him by the feet, turned this bird upside down, and what happens, something I didn't know, is that when the blood rushes to the head of the bird, it's like a sedative to the bird. The bird gives up resisting. And so took the bird out, said the intern then took him over to a chopping block, made some Native American incantations of how we're only taking this life to better our lives, and we don't take you unnecessarily, and cut the neck. The blood came out, you know, and then chopped off the head, took the bird, and put it in a pot of scalding water. It was dead. And the reason why was because, for those of you who don't know this, you can't pluck feathers out of a carcass unless the heat loosens them. I didn't know that, because I'd never seen this happen. So you have to scald the skin, and then the feathers pull out. And as this process was going on, and he cut the decision, the air was filled with this smell of cooked feathers, which was just, it was grotesque to me. It was not a good smell. And, you know, it takes me time to process these things sometimes, but 2 days later at Thanksgiving, there was no physical smell in my nose, but this smell of death, which is what it was still in my senses, and I just couldn't eat it anymore. I could not eat that bird. That's the last time I had turkey. That's the last time I had an animal product. And, I began to think that I shouldn't, because on this very peaceful place, it was not a Thanksgiving for this creature who, I took its life for just no apparent reason other than to just have some turkey on Thanksgiving. And, Thanksgiving from that day forth had a different meaning for me. So I shared this story with Jean and Suzanne yesterday, and from that day forth, I think concern, not just for wild animals in our environment, which obviously this farm gets involved in every day, and not just from a perspective of eating plants so that we can better humans, the quality of humans' life, like Sharon salmon, but also so that we can be kind and gentle as stewards of our world, the powerful people in our world, to be kind to other living things. And I think maybe you'll say something about that today. That's why all of us plant eaters are here, to hear Jean.
Well, I love what is happening here, and the idea of mindfulness, and what it ultimately means. It is paying attention. It is paying attention to our health, but also to the impacts of our behaviors on others and on the earth. And, I have spent a lot of time at factory farms, and I'll provide a little bit of background on that, just so you have a sense of how we human beings treat other animals. And I think how we treat others actually says more about us than about those who we have power over. And oftentimes, when we are mistreating other creatures who are less powerful than us, we start coming up with rationalizations and justifications and to continue with habits that are not healthy physically or emotionally or even for the planet. And we have prejudices that many of us are unaware of. Being called a turkey, for example, is not a compliment, right? It's a put down. So this is a way that a victim of our cruelty to turkeys and other animals is validated in this prejudice and this thing that we say without being mindful, without thinking about it, without paying attention to what we've just said and what it has enabled and continues to enable. So here, we're largely concerned about health and not making ourselves ill by eating animal products and other things that are not good for us. For me, I've been a vegan since 1985, and I went vegan because I didn't want to support a cruel system. And in the vegan world, in the animal rights world, we focused specifically on the cruelties humans do to other animals. And farm animals are by far the largest number of animals that are mistreated. In the US alone, we have over 9 billion farm animals raised and slaughtered every year. Over 9 billion. That's a bigger number than there are people on the planet. And every year, we run these animals through this system. They are mass-produced, they are artificially inseminated, they've been genetically manipulated for production traits. Dairy cows, for example, produce 10 times more milk than they would in nature. They're pushed beyond their biological limits. They're killed at just about 3 or 4 years old because they cannot sustain this. And then they're killed for ground beef. And the other thing about the dairy industry is that for a cow to produce milk, she has to have a baby, just like other mammals. So these cows are forcibly impregnated year after year. Their babies are taken away at birth, and then the mother goes into the milk stream where she's hooked up to milk machines 2 or 3 times a day and pushed, again, to her biological limit, and then wears out after just a few years. The baby calves are useless to the dairy industry if they're male. So that's how the veal industry was created, to use all these unwanted male calves born on dairy farms. So this is, and I'm not going to go too much into this stuff because it's not happy stuff, but it's the reality. And it's good to be mindful and aware of it. And I also hope that, in some cases, when you're talking to others who might ask a question about what happens to animals, that some of this might be useful too. In the case of turkeys, they have been so profoundly bred, again, for big breasts, because breast meat is the most popular, that they cannot reproduce naturally anymore. They're all products of artificial insemination. Turkeys chickens grow 4 times faster than normal. They die of what's called flip-over syndrome, when their hearts and lungs can no longer support this fast growth rate, because they're growing so fast and so large. And you might ask, how can they lose millions of birds to heart attacks at a young age every year and still be profitable? The answer is they grow 4 times faster than normal. So you can afford to lose many and it's still profitable. So this is an industry that looks at animals as commodities, not as living, feeling creatures. And this is also an industry that looks at farm workers as expendable commodities. And it looks at consumers as a market. And it doesn't mind if we get sick, because then they can sell us the drugs. 80% of the antibiotics used in the United States are fed to farm animals. So we also have the development of antibiotic-resistant pathogens that are developing in the factory farm system. So when we need medication, these pathogens might be resistant, and then the formerly life-saving drugs are no longer useful. So this is an industry, and the pharmaceuticals are very deep in it, that affects us in many ways that we don't even think about. And then there are the environmental impacts. In the United States, there is 10 times more land that is used for animal agriculture than is used to grow food for people. On this farm, it had been used to grow corn to feed farm animals. We could feed far more people with far fewer resources through plant-based agriculture. And there's a statistic I heard recently that just shows to what extent human activity, and specifically animal agriculture, has impacted our earth and ecosystems. We cut down rainforests to grow soybeans to feed farm animals. We are destroying prairies to grow corn and soybeans to feed farm animals. So we've destroyed ecosystems. We've destroyed natural habitats. We've taken away the homes of wild animals. And there was a study recently done looking at biodiversity, and it compared domesticated and wild animals. And when they looked at mammals living on Earth, on the land, 96% are either human beings or domesticated animals, mainly farm animals. Only 4% of the mammals living on land today on this earth are wild. It's because we're destroying these wild places. And why do we do this? That is sort of fundamentally the question that we need to try to understand and learn and try to do better. And, I think most of us just grow up with habits. I grew up eating meat because everybody around me was eating meat, and I didn't really think about it. I wasn't mindful. And then I started learning about factory farming, and I just didn't want to be part of that system. And so for me, it's been a process, and I think for all of us, it's a process. For me, being here and talking to Ron and talking to others here and learning about the health issues. Last night when Suzanne and I and Ron were talking, we were kind of having our minds blown about the health side of this, right? I thought Forks Over Nights was a very high-level plant-based diet, but I learned that there are higher-level plant-based diets, right? So for us, that is part of the learning and part of the health side of it. And for me, when people ask me what is it to be vegan, what I've been saying lately is that it is an aspiration, recognizing that we're imperfect humans and we will constantly learn and we will also make mistakes, but we need to constantly aspire to do better. But to me, it's an aspiration to live as kindly as possible. That means kindness to other animals It means kindness to ourselves, meaning eating food that doesn't make us sick. It means kindness to the earth, and it means kindness to other animals. It's about kindness, and I think very few people would be against kindness. And you know, most of us want to see ourselves as humane. But at the same time, you know, we grow up in a society where eating animals is the norm. And then when you get to be a certain age, taking heart medication is the norm. And we don't even think about the environmental impacts of our food choices, which we make every day. So I believe that, you know, converging these things, as Ron was talking about here on this farm, about health, compassion, and ecological sustainability, is where I think so much comes together. And we talk, in my last book, I talk about encouraging people to live in alignment with their values and interests. And again, most people are humane. Most people don't like to hear about animal cruelty. Most people would rather not support animal cruelty. But we grow up believing we need to eat animals for health, which is a complete myth, but that is a belief system we grow up in. So it's about being, again, mindful. And so living in alignment with our values, so we're humane. And instead of saying, don't tell me, I don't want to know, or I don't want to think about it when it comes to animal agriculture, which is sometimes what we do, we can know what we're eating, come to a place like this, eat these amazing plant foods, and feel good about it emotionally. And then we eat food that nourishes us and doesn't make us sick. I mean, that's in our interest. Most people, I think, if they're rational, would think, yeah, that's a good idea. And also, eating food and supporting a food system that's not destroying the planet. I think most people would agree that that makes sense. So what we're talking about here is really about enhancing our lives and our experience on this planet. And it's about being mindful, and it's about paying attention. It's about not just doing what we do because we've always done it. And then when we do what we do because we've always done it, and when we don't feel good about it, oftentimes then we start creating, again, these rationalizations to make it okay to do what we do. And one of those rationalizations is to put down our victims, right? So calling somebody a turkey, as I mentioned, is not a compliment. So we denigrate the victims of our abuse. And we do this emotionally, we do this systemically. Farm animals are excluded from the Federal Animal Welfare Act, right? You think there's this Federal Animal Welfare Act, it protects animals from cruelty. Farm animals are explicitly excluded. The only federal law that protects farm animals against cruelty is, ironically, the Humane Slaughter Act. And it excludes the majority of animals who are birds. Like over 90% of the farm animals killed are birds. They are excluded from the Humane Slaughter Act. On top of that, states have passed amendments to anti-cruelty laws to exempt normal agricultural operations. And a normal agricultural operation is a practice that the industry has adopted, and if enough of them do it, it's normal and therefore legal, no matter how cruel it is. When we started doing this work, I was going into stockyards, finding living animals thrown in trash cans or thrown literally on piles of dead animals. Our first rescue was Hilda, a sheep we found on a pile of dead animals. We rescued her, thinking she would have to be euthanized. We brought her to a veterinarian. As he examined her, she started perking up, and then she stood up. What we think happened was she was packed into a crowded livestock truck. It was a very hot August day with hundreds of other sheep. And on the trip from upstate New York to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, she passed out. Other sheep on that truck died. So the truck driver probably backed up the truck to the unloading dock. The sheep that could walk walked off, and there were some bodies still in the truck, so he drove it around back and drew through these bodies onto the dead pile. And Hilda was still alive, just unconscious. So we rescued her, she recovered, she lived with us for more than 10 years. And watching her recover and seeing her heal kind of helped us heal. Because seeing this sort of cruelty over and over, you know, it does something to you. And I feel bad for the animals in this system. I also feel bad for the people who work in this system. Could you imagine what it would be like to work in a slaughterhouse? For 8 hours a day, your job is cutting the throats of animals. People working in those places don't like it. And I also feel bad for dairy farmers, for example, who are struggling now. The industry is shifting. You have small farms being taken over by bigger farms, and you have a system that is completely unsustainable. There was a study that came out last year where they looked at the amount of support that the dairy industry gets from the government. 73% of dairy farm income comes from government programs. That's insane. And so, so we have gluts of cheese, over 1 billion pounds of government cheese. Then we do exports. The former USDA secretary, Tom Vilsack, and now is the head of the Dairy Export Council, trying to push dairy products around the world. So this is a system where you have government money that is enabling it. And the big farms are able to enhance their profits. The little farms are barely holding on. So instead of giving billions of dollars to this industry to enable this system to continue, money from the government should start going to transition farms, from animal agriculture to plant-based agriculture. And that's what I love about what is happening here, the plant-based agriculture, and doing it in a way that is regenerative. And there are government programs that could be available to small plant-based operators. And one of the greatest things I think that has happened is, when Suzanne and I came out here a while back, she got a story in a USDA publication, farmer.gov, about this farm and the vegan potlucks that Anthony helps put together. And so it was pretty amazing to see vegan potlucks mentioned on a USDA website. And that's the kind of thing. You have this machinery in Washington. You have this bureaucracy where literally billions of dollars are spent every year. And it's being spent not in a mindful way. It's being spent because that's how we've always done it. It's being spent because these dairy farms are struggling. We need to help them not go out of business. But that system, that industry is shifting. People are drinking less cow's milk. Plant-based milks are on the rise. That industry is changing. And our government support system also needs to change. And so this is going to involve a lot of pressure in Washington. It's important to get to know our elected officials, but it's also important to lead by example and to demonstrate what we can do, by eating plants. And that's where some of the stories of the people here are so inspiring about getting off of medication and living well. And I think those examples will resonate with many people. We are social animals. We do what those around us do. And when we see somebody who we have known, or even we hear about in a media story, who had significant health problems, being able to get off of their medication and shift, that starts changing how people see the world and starts allowing them to recognize that they can be empowered to live well. And it's individuals, and each of us can lead by example, but it's also not only working with government and personal, but other institutions, like doctors and medical systems. That's why I love what Ron is doing here with his health practice. I had not been to a doctor in many years, and I'm 56 now, but this was maybe about 10 years ago, and I thought, I haven't been to a doctor in decades, I might as well go to a doctor just to see how things are going. So I go to this doctor, and he starts asking me questions about my family. And I told him that my grandfather died of a heart attack, and my father had a heart attack. And without taking any tests or anything, this doctor says to me, well, I might want to put you on heart medication. It was astounding. So I left that hospital, never went back, and then started doing marathons, and I've now done 6 of them, and then did triathlons, I did an Ironman, just to show that a vegan of many years can do this. But this was the doctor's sort of mindless kind of practice. And there are probably other pressures, like insurance issues, where this is the safe thing for the doctor to do, to say, I'm going to put you on medication. And also, frankly, he probably would, it'd be profitable to help move these drugs out. So that is another system that is problematic, where we need to challenge what is normal and say, wait a sec, can we do better? So it's mindfulness. I really love that quote, which I had not heard before. But paying attention and being mindful, and then being discerning and thinking, okay, what am I doing? And does it make sense? And even if everybody else is doing it, does it make sense? And if it doesn't make sense, what does make sense? So eating plants makes all the sense in the world when you think about it rationally. But it's been, we often talk about human beings as the rational animal, but I think it's a lot more accurate to say that we're the rationalizing animal, and we rationalize if we don't feel good about something. So this is where it gets again into sort of our conscience and our ethics and who we are on this planet, and how we treat others, especially those without power, says a lot about us. And I've been doing a lot of reading lately on what power does to people. There's this professor in Berkeley who wrote a book called The Power Paradox. And there's that old Lord Acton line, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But it's actually been shown scientifically, empirically, with this scientist who has found that people with power don't pay attention to others, don't empathize with others. And when it comes to farm animals, we wield enormous power over them. We mass produce them. We genetically breed them for certain traits. We confine them their whole lives. And then we kill them and eat them. I mean, this is complete control and power over these creatures. And it has led to, again, some egregious cruelties that I've touched on, but I'll just mention one other one here to give you, a sense of how bad it has gotten. There was a case in California with an egg factory. Okay, so in the poultry industry, you have two distinct breeds of chickens. You have the meat-type birds, who I mentioned before, who grow 4 times faster than normal for meat. Then you have the egg-type chickens, who've been genetically bred to put all of their feed energy, all their calories, into egg production. So they do not grow very fast or very large. So with the hatcheries that hatch out these egg-laying hens, you have males and females. The females are raised to become egg-laying hens, but the males are useless to the egg industry. So they're literally thrown away. They're ground up alive on the day they hatch. So this is one of the inherent problems with the egg industry. But anyway, there's this egg farmer in California, and that background is useful in understanding the market at the slaughterhouse. So this egg factory in California, and many egg farmers now, have a hard time getting rid of their spent hens, because the hens, when they live in these small cages, they can't even stretch their wings. They have bruises and abrasions on their bodies from constantly scraping against the wire bars. And this egg factory could not find a slaughterhouse to take 30,000 hens, because the slaughterhouse wants to kill the heavy meat birds. It's more profitable to kill the heavy meat birds, and time is money, so the slaughterhouses did not want to take these skinny, spent hens who were bruised and, not quality meat. So this egg factory got a wood chipper, and he threw live hens in the wood chipper. We tried to get this guy prosecuted for cruelty to animals, but the local prosecutor said it's a normal agricultural practice, so we're not going to prosecute. And one of the experts that came forward to defend this practice was a veterinarian at the American Veterinary Medical Association, who was on their animal welfare committee, saying that this is a normal and an acceptable agricultural practice. So it gives you a sense of just how bad it has gotten. And I was actually in a court case here in New Jersey where I found a couple of hens in a trash can at an egg factory who are still alive. And the local SPCA wouldn't bring charges. We actually, thankfully, had some really good lawyers. We were able to get into court with it. And then I was there arguing before a judge and the egg factory's lawyer and describing how these 2 hens were in the trash can, but they were still alive. And the egg factory's lawyer said that legally they could treat these birds like manure. So throwing them in the trash run was fine. And the judge asked, isn't there a difference between live birds and manure? And the egg factory lawyer said, no, there's no difference. Now, that judge, I'm happy to say, said, I disagree, and he convicted him of cruelty. Now, the egg factory appealed, and they actually won on appeal, and ultimately were found not guilty. So anyway, that gives you a sense of just how bad the laws have been. Now, we've had some success in recent years. We've had some initiatives to ban confining animals in cages and crates where they can't even turn around. I mentioned the battery cage hens in these small cages that can't stretch their wings. Now there are some states that say they have to have at least enough space to stretch their wings. It's modest, but it's a step. In the case of calves raised for veal, again, these are calves that come out of the dairy industry, and they're taken from their mother at birth, chained by the neck in wooden crates their whole life, unable even to turn around. Now that's being outlawed in a number of states. And then the other confinement system that is common, that is also starting to be outlawed, are gestation crates for breeding pigs. These are 2-foot wide metal enclosures where these breeding sows are kept for their whole lives, or actually during their gestation period, which is most of their life. Right before giving birth, they put them in another crate called a farrowing crate, which is also 2 feet wide. And the mother can just stand up and lay down. And when she lays on her side, the piglets can nurse through the bars in the crate. And she's kept that way for about 2 or 3 weeks. And then the babies are taken away to be fattened for slaughter, killed at 6 months old, the babies. And then the mother is reimpregnated right when the babies are taken away and put back in the gestation crate. So she lives this constant cycle of impregnation, birth, reimpregnation. And when we're treating other animals like this, what does it do to us? What is our experience when we're relating to others in such a violent and abusive way?
I've been into these places, and I've seen what it does to people. And rather than being mindful and thinking about what we're doing, and rather than empathizing and thinking about the suffering we're creating, the tendency is to blame the victim. So, I went to Cornell, got a master's in agricultural economics. I wanted to understand the agribusiness mindset, and this is a story that kind of illustrates these psychological maneuverings we do. So the teacher brought us into the pig barn, and he was showing us routine farming procedures with piglets. And these include cutting off the piglet's tail, notching their ears, and this is all done without painkillers, and these are painful acts. So we went into this barn. There were 2 sows, the mother pigs, in farrowing crates, each without 10 piglets. The teacher grabbed a piglet out of the crate and said, well, this is how we do it. And he had this tool, it looked like pliers, but it had a blade, and he cut off the tail. And the piglet started screaming and bleeding. And then he took another tool for ear notching. It was like a triangle shape, and he cut these notches into the ear for identification purposes. And again, the piglet's screaming and bleeding. And then he says to the people in the class, who wants to try this? People were looking down, they didn't want to do it. Eventually, one of the young men this is an animal science class. A lot of these are pre-vet, which also speaks again to the socialization that happens in these schools. So a lot of these students, they didn't want to do it, but one of them stepped forward, tried his hand at these mutilations. Then a second student stepped forward, and each time a student stepped forward to do this, you could see this becoming more normalized and more accepted. And the initial resistance, the natural empathy, the natural aversion to causing harm was draining away. And it was bad becomes normal. And so the next day, we came into this pig barn where we had done this to these pigs. And I didn't do it, but where humans had done this to these other animals. And there were only about 2 piglets in each crate. Most of them had died. They bled to death. And the teacher, rather than saying what we did was problematic, and I remember him saying that when he did the ear notches, he likes to do it really deep so he can identify them. And I just thought, wow. And instead of saying, maybe I cut them too deep or whatever, he said, it's a genetic problem. We're going to contact the Pig Improvement Company, which is the name of the company they got the pigs from, literally, the Pig Improvement Company, and deal with that. So again, here is making an excuse, not being mindful, not taking responsibility, and not paying attention. So this is the industry we're dealing with, and when humans have habits, we tend not to be mindful, not to question, and we tend to go along with what everybody is doing without also paying attention and thinking about, does this make sense? And that's why a gathering like this and a place like this, I think, is so important and so special. It's a place to learn from others and ultimately to heal ourselves biologically, but I would also say emotionally and spiritually even. It's a place where there is the aspiration to live kindly on the earth and not to destroy it, not to cut down trees, but to live among them and to live among other animals in a space that we share. You know, we share this earth with other creatures. You know, there's that bumper sticker, humans aren't the only species on earth.
We only act like it. And it's kind of true. And we tend to feel entitled. And, you know, getting kind of back to the power thing, you know, as human beings, you know, with our technology and whatnot, we've become quite powerful on this planet. And unfortunately, it has, I think, caused us to live with increasingly less empathy and to be increasingly less mindful. Because we can get away with it, at least in the short term. But there are long-term consequences for our species. You know, animal agriculture is not only destroying ecosystems that are taking away habitat for other animals, destroying ecosystems and destroying the earth the way we do is also having significant impacts on the climate crisis. You know, you may have heard about the report that came out from the United Nations a few years back called Livestock's Long Shadow. In it, they talked about how animal agriculture is a greater contributor to climate change than the entire transportation industry. So it's really good that people are biking or walking or taking public transit or whatever, but eating plants instead of animals would have a greater impact even on climate change than changing how we drive. So anyway, this is an issue. How we eat has profound impacts on our health, on other animals, and on the earth. And it really, I think, helps define who we are. It is perhaps our most intimate connection to the earth. What we eat literally is incarnate. It becomes who we are. And if we're eating food that is toxic, if we're eating food that is a product of violence and cruelty, it has an effect, I think. And so paying attention, doing what we can to make a difference, and transforming our food system, transforming ourselves, and living in a way that is mindful. And I'll just finish with a story of a calf who I used to do a lot of stockyard research. I went to this one stockyard in upstate New York and saw this calf who was laying in an alleyway, left for dead. And he was a Holstein. He had been born on a dairy farm that morning. It was a freezing day. And the farmer said, there's an auction today, let's get him off the farm, because he was a male, not useful to the dairy industry. So off to the auction he goes. He was still wet from afterbirth, and he fell, and he was dying of hypothermia. And so I saw him, and I went up to the stockyard manager, and I said, what's going on with this calf? He He said, I got to bury him later today. As if it was an imposition on this worker that he's got to bury this dead calf. No empathy or consideration or concern at all for this calf. So I said, well, what if I take him off your hands? Sure. So I took this calf to a nearby veterinarian who works a lot in the dairy industry. And I brought him in, and she said, what are you wasting your time for? It makes no economic sense. And I said, to me, this isn't about economics. This is somebody, this is an individual who I want to do what I can to help. And after some pushing and pulling, she said, okay, and she gave him intravenous medicine, and they brought him up to the sanctuary and watched him 24 hours a day. And when he first came in, he couldn't even lift his head. His eyes were sunken in. He was practically comatose. But after being on the IV, after about half a day, the light started coming into his eyes. He was able to lift his head. Then a day or two later, he was able to stand up, and he was doing much better, and I was feeling really good, but he wasn't thriving. And I was wondering, what's wrong? I brought him out to the cow barn. He needed to be with his people. The cows mooed to welcome him. He mooed back. From that day on, he thrived. He ended up weighing close to 3,000 pounds. And living with us nearly 20 years. So that was Opie. And I loved to go out into the barn and to be able to see him and to know where he came from. And his story is a story of transformation. And there are many folks here who have their own stories of transformation. Going from eating food that makes us sick to eating food that is nourishing and healthy. And I think kindness to animals is also nourishing and healthy. And so is kindness to the earth. So I guess we'll just sort of close on that and open it up for anything anybody wants to talk about.
Just for those of you who are new here, I just want to draw your attention to this structure. To our right, this farm was the largest dairy farm and the most productive dairy farm in the latter 20th century in New Jersey. There were 600 milking animals here. And as you drive down the road, this barn, which is about 100 years old, had heifers in it, young female cows. But as you drive down, you'll see there are tall silos, which are on the next farm, which was this farm. And it was a factory farm. It was exactly what Gene is describing to you. You'll see, as you drive this way down West Mill Road, you'll see these large sheds, these metal sheds. To be efficient, and this was one of the most efficient farms in New Jersey, they would keep cows in these buildings for their entire lives. Just milk them. They would not be going outside. This system developed in the 1950s here on this farm. It was one of the first farms in the nation to have such intensely and cruel agriculture. And so I just wanted to tell you that as you walk around.
And that's why the transition and transformation is so beautiful, right? And also the cornfields that had been, GMO, Monsanto, all this, healing those, regenerating those. So it's about healing. I mean, that's really the bottom line in all of this is healing. And paying attention to what makes us sick, physically and otherwise, and going, wait a sec, what can we do that makes sense, that is healthy?
Any questions?
My question is really an observation, and the language that you use, and speaking as the government does this, the government does that. And I just want to bring it back to, we are here in the U.S., the government. It's a government of the people, by the people. So not to be, so I kind of want to make it really real that we have ultimate responsibility as voters, and choose to represent us has an impact. So
I think it's a very important point. Democracy is a participatory sport. We need to show up, we need to vote, we need to be engaged, get involved with political candidates who represent your interests. Absolutely agree with that.
Hi, thank you for being here. I want to know, what can I do, or what can we do to help these animals other than just being plant-based?
No, well, thank you. First thing, of course, is eat plants, don't eat animals. That's about, and encourage other people as well. Because for each person who stops eating animals, that's dozens of animals saved every year. So being a positive example, giving people tools to shift. And some of these tools could be online videos. In some cases, it is helpful for people to see the cruel images, to see just how bad it is, because people are shocked and surprised. And sometimes that'll change how they think about eating. But in other cases, it's just bringing a great vegan meal to work and sharing it. I think oftentimes obstacles to change are fear of change. And if somebody has a health crisis, there's a strong motivation to change. But if somebody is not, if it's more of an elective choice, then sometimes attracting them with tasty food and showing it's not that difficult and giving people the tools. One of the obstacles, again, is fear that they can't do it. What am I going to eat? Where am I going to get my protein? I mean, these are fears people have because they are beliefs we grow up with. So just being a good example, sharing information, providing support, good food, even recipes, and being involved in the political process is very important because we are in a democracy. Showing up, paying attention, showing up, and being a presence and inspiring and helping others as well.
Isn't it true that I can be arrested for taking photographs in a slaughterhouse and also for making any disparaging remarks about eating animals?
Yeah.
Health effects?
Well, this again speaks to the power of the factory farming industry, which is tied into the pharmaceutical industry, which is tied into petrochemicals. Look at the huge fertilizer. Corn, I mean, it's no coincidence that the caucuses are in Iowa, right? Big corn, and if they can't produce enough, cannot get enough animals to eat the corn, then they create ethanol. So this is a massive machine. Insurance companies, banks, financing, real estate, taxing. This is a massive machine. So, I'm sorry, what was the question? I kind of got off on a tangent there. Being arrested, okay. So, they passed these ag-gag laws in many states, making it illegal to document conditions and to speak about what happens. Some of you perhaps heard about the Oprah Winfrey when she was sued by the cattle industry. She had a former rancher, Howard Lyman, who is now a vegan advocate, on her show, and he talked about how they were feeding dead cows to live cows. And Oprah said, "You just stopped me cold from eating another burger." The Texas cattleman said, "You can't say that, we're taking you to court." So they went to court in Texas, took a long time. Oprah prevailed at getting the case dismissed, but it cost her a lot, and I think it chilled her and other people from speaking about these issues.
So, yes, this is an industry with a lot of power in government circles.
The ag-gag laws are an example of it. There's also in Washington, D.C., the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. It actually was first called the Animal Enterprise Protection Act, specifically geared to preventing animal activists from investigating and exposing these operations. So the Animal Enterprise Protection Act passed in like 1993, and then later on they wanted to up it, and they changed the name from Animal Enterprise Protection Act to the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, so they could label animal rights activists as terrorists. So this is an industry that, doesn't only exploit animals and workers and extract value from the land, they also do a lot in terms of messaging and appropriating, denigrating and marginalizing critics, and appropriating, actually, folks that they exploit. An example of this is in the poultry industry. There's these contract growers like Tyson and Purdue, and they contract with small farmers. who are in many cases in somewhat of a desperate situation. They have land, they need to make an income, so they sign a contract with the poultry company to build a barn to the company's specifications. They usually go into debt to do it, so this is where the banks are involved. And then they provide all the labor to take care of the chickens that are owned by Tyson or Purdue. So the poultry company has all the kind of control over the system, while the grower has provided all the capital and gone into debt, provides all the labor. And then in their messaging, not only do they appropriate their capital and labor, they appropriate their image. They say, our birds are raised by family farmers. Family farmers who are basically indentured servants on their own land. And there are some of these poultry farmers now starting to speak out about this. There's a friend of mine named Craig Watts in North Carolina who talked about how Purdue was, basically treating him very badly, and he was in debt, he was on a treadmill, he was not going to get off of it. So, and a lot of poultry growers have that experience. So this is an industry that does not only exploit people's labor and appropriate their capital, they even appropriate their identities in this way.
Hi. This is a very controversial subject, and I know you took a lot of flack from your position on this. So I'd like to throw you a curveball and give you another controversial subject. And this deals with abortion. Now, the fact is I was very impressed with what you said. I thoroughly believe you. When we partake in this animal eating and this animal production, it numbs our conscience, it numbs our mindfulness, and it numbs our ability to be kind. Now, the question I have for you, what effect do you think it has on us killing 1 million fetuses a year and just ignoring it, call it women's rights, call it health rights, and then just ignore it? And then, as you know, there's a big controversy whether you should bury. It's been proven, I think, illegal to bury the fetuses. We just do whatever we want. We just pretend it doesn't exist. I wonder if you feel this has any effect on numbing our conscience about all these other issues like animal rights and environment.
I mean, it's a serious matter, and I think addressing it in a mindful way and addressing it in a holistic way and understanding, being kind to all involved, including, women who find themselves in tough predicaments. And, it's a tough one, man. I think I'm pro all life, and that includes the mother, her having some control also over her decisions, but also recognizing there may be some other life, and it's complicated. I don't have an easy answer to it, I know in the animal rights space, there are different approaches. One friend of mine used to be a speechwriter for George W. Bush. He wrote a book called Dominion, The Power of Man, The Suffering of Animals, and the Call to Mercy. And he very much has called on conservatives who are against abortion to take on the animal rights perspective, arguing kind of philosophical consistency. And then, on the other side, there are, I think, legitimate concerns about, the government controlling people in certain ways that may not be great. So it's complicated. I'll tell kind of a story that brings in abortion in a kind of weird sort of way, but it just popped in my head, so I'm going to say it. One of our early campaigns was in Higgins, Pennsylvania, where they had this annual pigeon shoot. And at the time, we were not being very mindful. The other side was not being very mindful. And they were killing pigeons. We went in and said, you should stop killing pigeons, it's cruel. And they'd say, go away, you're crazy. And we would say, you're a murderer. And they would say, well, what about abortion? And we would say, your mother should have had one. And it was like, it was just not mindful, right? So that was one of our experiences. And I gotta say, by yelling like this, it brought more of them out to yell, because anger and violence attracted more anger and violence, and it wasn't healthy. One year, the Ku Klux Klan came out, and I was going, hope they're not on our side. And they weren't. But it was like, became this crazy thing. It really did. But our behavior was not kind, right? And their behavior responded in a not kind way. And then we changed. And instead of yelling at them, we started documenting conditions. When pigeons were injured, we would rescue them. And by the way, if anybody here ever visits our farm in Watkins Glen, New York, it's a sanctuary for farm animals, and you see pigeons flying around, they are descended from Higgins. So it's done, and Higgins, by the way, does not happen anymore. And the way that we were able to change things was by taking on a non-violent approach. Instead of screaming at them, we started helping the victims, these pigeons who were injured, and focusing on that. And what that did was, as we were trying to help these birds, the folks who were shooting them and wanting to kill them started trying to get to the pigeons before we did, so they could rip them up in front of us, bite off their heads, do this really ugly stuff. And what it did was it created this contrast between the animal rights people who are trying to help and these shooters who are acting in horribly violent ways. And it's similar to, the civil rights movement, right? When people saw what was happening to oppressed people and how the authorities were abusing their power, it changed our cultural approach to that. So, a lot of this boils down to abuses of power. And anyway, but the abortion one's a tough one. It's complicated.
I came here feeling pretty good.
Well, get you back feeling good.
I think it's to the point. Thank you for your presence and all the work you do. But it's numbing.
Yeah.
And if it's numbing for us and me, who've made changes and have seen the films, how do you keep your sanity? And thank you for that issue, because I think it speaks to what I'm confronted with, and I see it all over in the world, this cognitive dissonance where people just can't let it in. And the powers that be that are smart as hell in keeping it from being exposed.
Yeah.
The films are out there. I recommend them to my friends who've had bypasses. I never get comments back.
Yeah.
And some of them I can't even watch, like Dominion.
Yeah.
I couldn't get through that.
That's brutal. Yeah.
Yes, it is brutal.
It is.
So,
Well,
this is a wonderful place, and it's grassroots, and it'll grow from here. But we're kind of the choir.
We are.
And how do you break through? And where do you take your stand with people? Because when I'm with friends and they're eating a meal, and I'm just ordering, as Dr. Clapper said last time, with his posture, he talks to the chef, that's still another chicken or another lamb that's going by the wayside. And I'm not saying anything.
Yeah. Well, just being there eating plants among people who are not eating plants, sometimes they start paying attention, right? I'm a big fan of vegan integration versus vegan segregation. And we are social animals. We rub off on those around us. So that's something that we do every day where we can have a positive influence. But when it comes to dealing with some of these atrocities that are normalized, having the sanctuary has been a really important part of healing. Being in a place where you see animals who had only known violence and cruelty, enjoying life, playing and running, to see the calf, for the first time run in the field, how beautiful that is, not only for the calf, but for us, right? So I think all of us have to do what works, and each of us is an individual. And I think looking at these violent images, in some cases, is a good way to get somebody's attention, but it's not a good place to dwell because it does create, pain. And so dwell in the good things. Dwell in what you can do. Be empowered by any change, no matter how small you see. When I first started doing this work, I had more of a kind of an activist edge. And if somebody said, I stopped eating veal, my immediate response might be something like, well, what about dairy? The veal, right? Instead of finding the common ground and building, I would say, well, that's not good enough. It's not a good way to go, I don't think. So
Now, instead of saying, what about dairy, I'll say,
that's great that you stopped eating veal. That is a cruel sin. So you find the common ground, you build. And for folks who have not responded to, the videos you send and the information you send, because it is valuable information. And ultimately, the goal is to help people to live well, right? And if we approach this really with love and with the desire to help others, I think as time goes, people start recognizing that's what the intention is. And you know what? They could actually improve their lives, So that's the goal, is to help people live better. So that's on the grassroots level, which is really where a lot of the magic happens. And then, on the macro level, systemically, again, we need to work on government systems, get money out of animal agriculture towards plant-based. We need to support companies, and here, this might not fit exactly, but like Beyond Meat, which is a company that produces a plant-based meat to replace hamburgers. Now again, it's not a whole food plant-based, so it may not fit here, but it's part of the big system. And it just had an initial public offering, opened at $25 a share. Within a few weeks, it was at over 100. So the marketplace is also starting now to see a shift. And that is something actually to take heart from. It may not be exactly what everybody here would eat, but it is a step away from the animal industry. So you dwell in the good things, recognize and dwell in the good things, and be empowered and encouraged by the good things, and create more good things.
I grew up on a chicken farm, and we raised our chickens in buildings, but we were put out of business, as you say, by farmers who put their chickens in cages. And I think people have to be more mindful that everybody's looking for possibly the cheapest price of everything they can buy. They're on budgets, whatever. But that's what happens in these kind of industries, I think. And I think we also have to be mindful of not only eating the animals, but like, leather shoes, leather handbags, whatever, it goes way beyond just eating the meat.
Yes.
And also, what is your take on, in the plant-based industry, like a company like Monsanto, who tries to get into farms and alter their seeds that they have to buy, and that's also affecting the plant-based agriculture.
Oh yeah. Monsanto and genetic modifications and ownership. When you modify an organism and a seed, you own it. So to me, this is another indication of power, right? And then you're putting others out of business. And it's like the pharmaceuticals, who sometimes they patent a drug and they sell it for an insane amount. Their intention there is not to help, obviously. Their intention there is to extract dollars and profit, at the expense of others. So, these are systemic issues that are huge and will require systemic solutions, but a lot of it's going to start at the that just went out there. A lot of it's going to start at the grassroots level, but a lot of the small farms have been put out by the big farms, and there was this get big or get out mindset that the USDA was encouraging. And the USDA, if they're going to give out $1 million, giving it out to one farm is a lot easier than giving it out to 100 farms, 100,000 or whatever it turns out to be. So getting big and consolidation has been part of the system too. And then you have the distribution side of it. So there's all these systems in place, infrastructures in place that need to be retooled. And another of them is the land-grant universities. Here in New Jersey, it's Rutgers. In New York, it's Cornell. In California, it's the University of California. These land-grant universities get federal money, they get local money, they get private money. When I went to Cornell University, Monsanto was investing in bovine growth hormone for dairy cows. So now you have the legitimacy of Cornell promoting a Monsanto product. Now, Rutgers, wouldn't it be neat if they started promoting plant-based agriculture? And then you have the machine and the cooperative extension agents promoting a new system instead of saying, here's how you use BGH. Right, so that's part of the systemic reform that needs to happen. And it's going to be individuals at these institutions. And it's going to be businesses who do public-private partnerships with these institutions to create a new form of agriculture. And in the plant-based space, I see it as kind of bimodal. You have the large industrial ones, like Cargill, changed their name Cargill Meat Solutions to Cargill protein solutions. They're getting into plant-based proteins, pea protein, stuff like that. That is much better than animal protein, but is it perfect? No. So that's one mass production mode. You know, we have Burger King selling the Impossible Burger. That's better than a beef burger. Is it perfect? No. The Beyond Meat going, well, perfect? No, but steps in that direction. So this one industrial production side. And then you have the grassroots side. Farms like this, community-supported agriculture programs, farmers markets, community gardens. And that is another place where there's a lot of energy and a lot of juice, and I think a lot of opportunity. And again, if we get these land-grant universities and cooperative extension and USDA money going into these things, it can really build up from the ground up. And the last census of agriculture that just came out a month or so ago talked about 2 categories of farm size that were growing the most. One was 2,000 acres and more. The other was 10 acres and less. So the 10 acres and less, those are our people. And some might be a little more than that. But, you know, but that type of small, grassroots, passion-driven, mission-driven farm is, I think, where the future is, where the opportunity is, and what this is part of.
Okay. So, beautiful. We'll take 2 more questions. These 2 young ladies.
Our general food supply can be so contaminated. I'm just wondering if you know anything about ractopamine that was being administered to pork, to pigs.
Oh.
And if we banned it in the U.S., it's already banned in Russia and the EU.
You know, I don't know specifically about that item, but our food system is horribly contaminated. And it's not only things that are intentionally put into feed and given to animals, but it is like cleaning agents, you know, in these factory farms and in slaughterhouses. And what is allowed to be fed to farm animals is horrifying. You know, as I mentioned, you know, Oprah got in trouble for telling people that, or letting people know that cows were being fed to dead cows. And as they're concerned about mad cow disease, they changed the regulations saying, we can't do that anymore, but you know what they still allow? Dead cows to be fed to chickens, and then chicken manure to be fed to cows. So the prion, you know, the agent that causes mad cow disease, could still be in these cows that passes through the chickens and gets to the cows. Oh, and you can still use cow's blood in calf food. So it's this insane system where you have these byproducts. And if you can turn chicken manure into feed, you can make a waste product a sellable commodity. So, and again, there's tons of chemicals used in growing food, just the crops, but then also in cleaning, like dairies and other, you know, factory farms. Now, I don't know about that particular thing you mentioned, but I'll also say that the U.S. has some of the lowest standards for what is allowed. You know, and an example of this are the somatic cell counts allowed in cow's milk. Here, I think it's like over 700 is legal. In Europe, I think it's like less than 200. And a somatic cell count is like the pus in cow's milk. It's white blood cells. So in this country, we allow a lot to get into our food that is not allowed in other countries.
Hi. I just like, this is really depressing and stuff like that. What is your dream? Like, in cows, the future, if nobody eats meat anymore, what is the future of cows and chickens and pigs? Would you go to like farms, like their happy farms, to see them, or will they just go extinct? Or what is your dream?
Well, my dream are places like this, where maybe there's a few cows and pigs and chickens who are our friends, not our food. We create co-created spaces. So instead of raising and fattening pigs to slaughter, the pigs are here, and what they do to help out is they turn the compost, which they like to do. You know, and maybe the chickens will go and pick bugs off of the vegetables. Help us out that way. And there's this film called The Biggest Little Farm, and it's in California, and it's not plant-based, but you know, one of the scenes in that film is they have these trees with fruit on them, and they were having slugs going up the trees. Then they brought in the ducks, those slugs were gone, right? So there are these ways to pay attention and to co-create peaceful places like this. And it's a work in progress.
But in terms of farm animals, the reason we have billions today is
because we are mass producing them. We are artificially inseminating them. In the case of turkeys, the commercial turkey we have now would not exist anymore. They could not reproduce anyway, and they have short lives. They're very heavy. They're in pain every day because they're so heavy their feet can't support them, right? So there are certain animals, these domesticated, highly selected for production traits that may no longer exist. And I think that's okay because their lives are not great anyway. And then we go to a more diversified system where there's more space for wild animals. If we're growing plants instead of animals, there's a lot more land that we could let just be forest and prairie. A lot more native animals and pollinators. We're also destroying pollinator habitat. So the vision really is farms like this with animals who are friends, not our food, and co-creators, and wide open spaces where ecosystems thrive and humans visit in respectful ways, and then we work, in our cities or wherever we do, but we have just a more mindful, respectful approach to everything. But farms like this, I think, really play a very important role.
Thank you all for being here. I'm Nora, I'm the farm manager here, so I just wanted to take a minute and welcome you to the farm and to tell you a little bit about our farming and the farm stand that we have here. We strive to be part of the vision that Jean's been talking about. We've been working hard at it for the last few years. We are a certified organic farm, and the vegetables that you see in the farm stand have been grown here. There are a few grown from other local certified organic farms, and that's part of our vision too, is we need to be supportive of other farms that are trying to do the same things that we're trying to do. So our approach here is to grow not only organic or in an organic manner, but to grow in a restorative or regenerative manner. We are trying to heal the soil here that's been degraded for decades on end. And so we've come a long way with that, and we have a long way to go. And we would really appreciate your support here today. The farm stand is open. We invite you to go there and look and partake. There might still be some strawberries left. I'm not sure if they're sold out, but just started picking them. They're just becoming ripe. Again, everything's organic. Not only do we grow without using chemicals, we don't even use sprays that are approved or organically. We focus on building our soil microbial health and relying on that health to deter pests and diseases. And each year, as we progress in that process, we see better and better results. So we welcome you and would appreciate your visiting the farm stand. Thank you.
Yeah, supporting businesses in places like this is really important. Voting for politicians, being involved there, but also voting with our dollars every day, does make a difference. So, but thank you all so much. It's great to be here.